Welcome everyone to the Piazza Lecture Series. My name is Caitlin McGarry and I lead University Engagement at Piazza. We are incredibly grateful for all of you for taking your time out of your busy schedule to join us today, and I know our discussion will be a rich one. Our session today is Piazza Tricks and Subterfuge. Our featured speaker today is Professor Gareth Denyer of the University of Sydney. Professor Denyer has been teaching biochemistry, molecular biology, and nutrition at the University of Sydney since 1990. Over the years, he has pioneered the introduction of several e-learning innovations, and recently, he has strongly embraced the principles of crowd leverage and student-teacher partnerships in the learning process. Particularly valued are sustainable initiatives that not only foster student communication and engagement, but which capture the activity as a lasting legacy so that value can be added to the subsequent iterations of a course. In this lecture, Professor Denyer will share some of the many tips and tricks that he uses within Piazza to stimulate student participation, build community, and ultimately leverage the crowd to add intel-based enhancements to course delivery and assessment. Today, we are also joined by the following distinguished professors who have graciously agreed to contribute to today's discussion. We have just joining us Professor Alex Themming and Professor Samantha Clark, as well as Professor Marco Papa of the University of Southern California, Professor Vijay Sathi from the University of North Carolina at Chapel Hill, and Professor Matthew Hertz, Professor of Teaching and Computer Science and Engineering at the University at Buffalo. Welcome, everyone. We are so grateful to have each of you contribute to today's discussion. And Professor Denyer, thanks so much for joining us today, especially all the way from Sydney. The floor is yours.
Okay, thank you very much for that kind introduction, Caitlin, and thank you very much for everybody for turning up to have a discussion about this fantastic tool. My talk is called Piazza Tricks and Subterfuge. I hope you won't think there's too much subterfuge in it, and that it's all done for the greater good. There's about 4 different ways in which I try and help the students, try and help their development as young professionals, take advantage of analytics, perform a little bit of subterfuge, and basically get some inspiration for giving them extra resources and ultimately assessing them as well. And so those are the 4 sort of things that I'll go over. So the first thing is that I would like to emphasize to everybody, and if you're listening to this webinar as your first sort of introduction to Piazza, then the brilliant talk by Professor Hummel, which is the first in the Piazza lecture series, is really your go-to place. It really just encapsulates everything that Piazza is about, and how it can help you administer your class and get engagement of all of your students, even if you have a very, very large class. So I thoroughly recommend listening to that, and I agree with absolutely everything that Professor Hummel says. So one of the ways in which I think that we can extend that is to really help try and frame the behaviour of our students and help them grow into the professionals that we want them to be, and how they can acquire the graduate attributes that we want them to leave our institution with. So the first thing I suppose that we're all keen on them developing is as a graduate is the skill of discernment. You know, when should I ask a question? How should I phrase that question? How can I put some effort into the way that I articulate my question? So when we get questions on Piazza, it's really good to help the students reflect on whether or not their question has been formed in a way that is useful, whether it's easy to get to the crux of what they're trying to say, and whether or not they've actually thought about what they're saying. In other words, have they put some effort into articulating their question before they've just posted it up there? And all of this has a very, very positive effect. It makes the students start to take responsibility for the way that they word their question. And it often means that they end up answering their question even before they post it. And many students, when they go through this process, will say, you know, I had this question, but I actually worked it out for myself by articulating it. So then what I do is I encourage them to post their enlightenment. In other words, they've had a little light bulb moment, let everybody else share that. The other way that we can frame their behavior or help them frame their own behavior is by just realizing that they are in a public place. It's a safe place. It's a place where no one need feel crazy by asking questions. That's what it's there for. But it is a place where we need to foster a community, where we need politeness, where we need respect, where we need everybody to feel safe. And this is very important in this day of very high visibility. People's cyber footprints are something that they're going to carry with them for the rest of their lives. I come from a generation where I probably got away with a lot of things that weren't recorded, but now they are. And one's personal brand, the thing which is just as important as the marks that you'll get in your studies, is something that needs to be nurtured. And Piazza is a place where we can really help young people and students develop those skills of dealing with netiquette. The other way that we can do that is actually by presenting an example ourselves. And we find it quite useful when we as instructors engage in a debate, because we can actually show the students how we can have a very robust and yet very healthy academic exchange. And this is a great way of modeling and being a role model to the students, showing them how we can really have some very, very strong opinions on an academic manner, but treat each other with courtesy and respect. And that from that, new ideas come, and from that comes great explanation and enlightenment and so on. So this is a really, really good way of developing those skills in the students. And while I was preparing this seminar, Caitlin and I actually started to think about how you could even engineer this. You could actually start paying your TAs to contribute and to set off that sort of banter. So one of the ways in which Piazza is extremely useful is in the rich analytics that it has under the bonnet. And you've probably all gone into the statistics page and seen that you can download all of the class statistics as a CSV file. And if you haven't, then I strongly recommend that you do that. Now, even if you don't download that file, you can actually use the inbuilt sort of filters within Piazza to have a bit of a broad brush view of how your students are engaging with the tool. Now, what you'll notice from this data up here is that in our class of about 720 students, and in a course with some 850 posts at the time at which I made this slide, we have a very, very broad range of engagement. So we have some students that have looked at pretty much every post. We have some students that have made tens of contributions, and yet we have some other students who are pretty much disengaged, who have barely logged in and have barely looked at any posts. Now, this is extremely useful information for you in any research capacity. If you want to start thinking about how engagement relates to performance and to learning, then this is obviously an amazing go-to place. But it is actually quite revealing just within itself here. So you'll notice that the top student has viewed about 820 posts. And then you don't have to get very far down, say to about student number 10, before you get to students that have only seen 670 or so posts. Now, I say only, but 670 is quite a lot. But the reason I say only is that during that period, there were actually over 850 posts. Now, that becomes important because it just goes to show that even very engaged students don't listen to everything we say. They don't, even though they're on Piazza, they probably have the alerts set up for when a post comes in. They're not actually engaging with every single post that comes in, and therefore they're not engaging with every post that we make on all of our other systems. And this is a very important thing for us all to bear in mind. Now, the analytics, as I said, are beautifully correlated by the end of the semester with unit outcomes. Students that are disengaged in things like Piazza are going to be struggling to pass the course. But one of the really important things about the analytics is not just the fact that you see them at the end of the course, it's that you see them at all stages of the course. So here are a couple of graphs that show how Piazza engagement stacks up with a couple of the other systems that we use, our institutional electronic notebook, Lab Archives, and our course delivery system, Canvas. And what's remarkable about this is that there is no correlation. There's early on in the course, you might have somebody that's a strong engager in Piazza, but really hasn't got to grips with their e-notebook, or vice versa. And this just shows you that it's very important that you have a rich range of ways of getting data about engagement, and that Piazza forms one of those and a very important part of that. But you actually need to have a look at all of your systems before you decide on what you're going to say and how you're going to act. Now, I focus there on how the analytics are useful for us to counsel and identify students, but a really, really important thing about Piazza is the fantastic analytics that it gives us about our own engagement. And this is very, very useful if you are applying for tenure or applying for promotion, or you need in some way to show somebody that you're putting a lot of work into fostering the education of your students. In any course, when we have a course evaluated, we always find that the students claim that our feedback is not what they're expecting or want it to be. I mean, feedback is a little bit like Christmas presents. You never feel that you're getting enough and everybody else has got better than you. But in fact, when you point the students in the direction of the Piazza stats, they realize just how much work you and your TAs are putting in. So that long string of orange eye symbols showing all the instructor comments, or the instructor ticks on the student comments, or indeed the huge number of posts that you've answered, the timeliness of all of that, that is an incredible thing to show students, to convince them that you're really, really caring about their development. But of course, it's also a fantastic thing to show your faculty, to show your head of school, to show your promotion committee, because it's hard, objective evidence about the amount of work and effort and dedication that you have for your course. So this is really, really useful. And I actually foresee the day when things like this are triangulated against other metrics of instructor performance, to make it much more objective measures of our dedication to the cause. Now, where some subterfuge comes into my strategy is with my employment of my alter ego, my ghost. So I have an extra login over which I have a bit of control, and that means that I can submit posts to the discussion board without anybody knowing that it was actually me. It looks like it's just come from an anonymous student. Now, before you get too worried about that I'm doing something extremely dodgy here, in fact, nothing bad is happening. This is all done for very, very kind reasons, which I will go into. So no one gets hurt in the deployment of this strategy. So one way in which the ghost student can really help me is to address that thing that I brought up earlier, which is that no matter how many announcements we make on our systems, a lot of them will just be ignored or bypass the students. So if we need to clarify some administrative arrangements and we're worried about whether the students are getting the message, hitting them from a number of angles is a good idea. Now, like all students, they get a bit bored with the proclamations of their course coordinator. They are more likely to have a message resonate with them if they think it's come from their own cohort. Or at least if it's not more likely, at least it's an alternative. Now, I like to make a lot of proclamations. I'm very enthusiastic about my material. If I see something on the television or read an article in the newspaper, I want them to see it. And they can get a bit bored with my continual bombardment of the discussion board with these so-called interesting things, there's a lot of eye rolling that can start going on. So if I can spread those things out, both between systems and also between alter egos, then it actually makes the system work a lot better. If I want to create a new thread, if I want the students to think about a topic in a particular way, it sounds a little bit too pompous and sort of a proclamation from on high if I always do it. So just throwing it in as if it's come from a student is very effective. So I can even introduce a sort of a pretend misconception to get the students to test and probe their own understanding of a topic and try and get that discussion going on that so that I can wade in later and sort it out. Sometimes in any discussion board or even in any conversation, things can just go a little bit stale. It doesn't tend to happen in our courses because we have over 700 students. There's always saying something. But if you have a course where there's maybe 20, 30 or 50 students, you can often get a bit of a lull. And having a ghost student to kickstart the activity is really, really helpful, because if you were to do that as a coordinator, it would look a little bit desperate. But by doing it as a pretend student, you can get that reinvigoration, you can get that extra debate and engagement going, and it all just looks very natural, and the students respond to it very well. And another way of looking at that is sometimes that lull in conversation has happened because a student has created a bad mood. Students often go on to any discussion board and have a little bit of a whinge or question something that's happened, or basically just take down the mood a little bit. And it's nice if you can reset that. Now, you would never want to go in and start deleting the negative post, because that would look like censorship and that would break the trust of your general cohort. So the way to get it off the top of the list is to start populating the top with some things that are going to create some positive vibes. So something that's interesting, something that's fun, and very soon that negative post starts to get buried deeper and deeper and deeper down in the list of old posts. And it really has a very remarkable effect at reinvigorating not just the academic discussion, but also the tone of the student posts. So I strongly recommend this if you ever get to a stage where the mood needs to be reset. So the final sort of topic that I wanted to present as a tip, which does involve a little bit of subterfuge, is the way that we can gain inspiration from what the students are asking us to actually create new material for the course. And one of the best sorts of bits of new material are multiple choice questions, which could help students learn, and also ultimately that we can use in our exams. So we, as experts in the field, often find it difficult to get into the heads of our students and work out what it is that they're finding difficult. In Piazza, of course, students reveal those misconceptions willingly and in great quantity. So any blocks that they have to their learning, any sort of strange thoughts that they've got around the topic, they're very, very willing to go in and confess those. And of course, sometimes those misconceptions are not revealed in the initial question. Sometimes they're revealed in the explanations that their peers provide and in the follow-up discussions that happen. So basically, the Piazza discussions become a real goldmine of intelligence about the way that students are thinking, about the sort of things that they find tricky, and the ways in which they come to terms with the material. Now, all of this is incredibly vital intelligence, and it's something that we should all be inspired by. We can be inspired by it to create new learning resources for them, and that's obviously one very positive thing that we can do. But we can very, very easily turn what the students have said into fledgling multiple choice questions. And striking while the iron is hot on this is a really, really good idea. I've got a couple of examples here. So here's a situation where a student has got a little bit confused about the way that fats are digested, and they've been very good at articulating exactly what it is that they're struggling with. And instead of me writing a paragraph by way of explanation, I've actually written 5 well-constructed, independent sort of bullet points, which have a sort of timeliness to their narrative. So they're logical things that follow on one from the other. But instantly, those 5 statements form the inspiration and the foundation for a genuine multiple choice question. So it's very easy for me to take what I've written there and construct it into a multiple choice question, which I can then put into our class pool. And we use the website Peerwise, which is a place that students can go to set each other multiple choice questions. And the benefit of putting it into a pool like this is that we can test the questions. The questions will be rated, they'll be commented on, there'll be performance metrics, and we'll be able to start seeing how the options are all working as distractors. And of course, what's then happened is that we've now got a fully tested multiple choice question, which can go into a real examination. So this happens all the time. This is now essentially what I do when I'm answering questions on Piazza. I take the question and I try and frame it as a series of logical incremental steps, which together can be built into a really good explanation for the original student question, but how each of those steps then forms the basis of a question that can be used for study or even for examination. And the key thing, of course, here is they're really authentic. There's a credibility about multiple choice questions that you can use in the exam that actually directly relate to the misconceptions that the students actually have about your material. So that's a sort of summary of everything that I've talked about, the keeping the momentum going with the Ghost login, fostering the academic and an even online profile of our students, using the analytics to benefit your students and also yourself, and gaining inspiration from all the crazy things that they say. And I would like to finish by giving a huge acknowledgement both to Piazza as a fantastic tool and the whole team at Piazza for allowing me to do this presentation, and most of all to my colleague Dr. Dale Hancock, who is responsible for I was going to say the lion's share, but I'll say the leopard's share of all the contributions that are made to our site. So thank you very much for listening to me, and I hope we can have a good discussion about all of that.
Well, excellent. What a fantastic presentation. Thank you so much, Professor Denyer. We do have a minute or two if folks have any questions or want to contribute with some of their own tips or tricks that they've come across while using Piazza and engaging their students. If you'd like to do so, please select the hand icon to raise your hand, and I will unmute you to ask your question, or feel free to type it into the questions field, and I'm sure Professor Denyer would love to chat with you. Okay, Professor Papa, feel free to ask your question.
Yeah, if the professor uses cloning in the class, then how?
Oh, great question. So there's the ability to clone a class within Piazza. Professor Denyer, I'll let you take it from here.
Okay, I didn't realize that you could clone the class. Could you explain to me how that works?
Yeah, so I guess I've been doing this for, I don't know, 10 years, close to 10 years. And it's the same class that I teach. So there's quite a number of things like setting up, an individual assignment. And we change the assignments, but they are all kind of similar. And so, and especially at the beginning of the course, at the end of the course, is the same stuff that comes up. So you can actually clone from the last semester to the next semester the question, and when you clone it, is actually private, and so you can go and change it and customizing for the new class, change a little bit here and there, and then you make it public, and then it shows up. One of the things I probably wanted to report to Piazza, the way it works is that the cloned date and time is when you clone it. So if you want to clone ahead of time and then post, let's say a week later, unfortunately the date are kind of off. So what usually is good, you clone right before you want to post something. It would be nice if there was a feature that you clone, and then before making something public, you actually change the date and time to the current date and time. That would be one thing that I would recommend to have as some extra functionality.
So is the idea that you can derive inspiration from questions that students have asked in previous iterations of the course?
Oh, absolutely. When you clone, the answers actually get sort of like carried over as anonymous, and you can decide which one to keep of the answers and which one to throw away. So yeah, if you answer the question, a question comes up all the time, and it's already been answered. You can carry it over. And the only thing that it will do, it will show that whoever the student that asked the question is an anonymous student instead of being a real student of the current class.
Yeah, so that's a very clever idea, because it means that a frequently asked question that is not just frequently asked this year, it's been frequently asked for the past 5 years, is right up there, and the students can see that that's been not only been attended recently, but it's been dealt with by you in previous years. So and also they would feel assuaged about their own uncertainty as well, because it's not just them that has had this question, it's come up before. And
absolutely.
So, no, I really like that idea.
Great, thank you so much, and thanks so much for the feedback on what we can do to add additional functionality to Piazza. I really appreciate that.
You're welcome.
Okay, thank you. All right, next we have here Professor Matthew Hertz. Professor Hertz, you should be able to contribute.
Yeah.
Oh, hello.
Hopefully this isn't too loud. So one thing I actually do that helps drive students to using Piazza. So I have a very large class, so it's a very large lecture section just because of student numbers. So I tend to use lots of memes in my lecture slides just as a way of keeping their attention, that sort of thing. I actually have Piazza, and I always make a folder in Piazza where students can post their own memes for me to use in lecture, and that ends up being very active. But what I've seen is that students will frequently post in there, and then while they're, right after they post, they'll end up answering a question or two or asking their own question. So it's a good way. It makes my life easier. I don't know. My courses are usually freshmen, so 18 years old, 19 years old. I don't know what's popular with that population anymore, but I can use it to get something that's popular with that. And actually it goes to, I had never thought about it this way, but one issue is I teach computer science. They're 18, computer science and engineering. They're 18, 19 years old. Occasionally some of the things that get posted into there are inappropriate. But I always try to use this as a chance, because many of my students, they don't realize it's inappropriate. And so I always use it as a chance to teach them professionalism of like, I understand that you think this is funny, but you have to understand that how other students might see this, and I take it down, and I have to be very careful, very active in making it private and encouraging them to take it down so I don't actually have to delete it. But just getting them to, become engaged. And usually when that only happens maybe once or twice a term, and they're always like, oh, I never knew that, or I never thought of it that way. So it's just a good way to drive traffic and get them more engaged, get them more active. And once they do get active, once I say in class, I use this from, some student posted this, from Piazza, it gets students interacting more and using it more, which is a nice way of getting them in. Sort of
I really like several aspects of that. The fact that you create that creative space for them, which allows them to express themselves in in a way that they feel comfortable with, in an imaginative way. I like the way that it brings them in to engage, and as you say, once they've posted a meme, they often go in and post another question or answer a question, and then it also, layered on top of that, it gives you that opportunity to help them develop their sort of net citizen sort of skills, and work out what is acceptable in building their online brand, and what will need some development. So I think that you tick about 4 separate boxes with that strategy really quickly.
Yeah, and they like it, so
yes.
I'm always happy about it.
And look at it; it gives you fantastic ideas as well. If they've expressed a sentiment or a concept through a meme, then you can derive tremendous sort of creative inspiration from that, because you've got that extra knowledge and maturity that can take that to the next level.
Right, and sometimes they actually do it incorrectly. They'll post an idea, and the way that the way that they try to explain it in the picture or whatever isn't quite correct.
That's
which
right.
is actually really helpful for me, because then I can say, oh, okay, wait, let's think about this, and I can try to get them, and actually usually once or twice I've gotten them to correct it. I then use the corrected one to mention everything else, but it gives me an insight into what they're thinking that's their incorrect thinking, their incorrect modeling of the ideas.
That's absolutely. I mean, where Piazza really comes into its own is that window into the student mind, and which is so difficult for us as experienced professionals to get. I mean, not only are they're obviously a different generation, but their skills are still developing in the discipline area. So we underestimate sometimes just how much several decades of engagement with our discipline has given us.
Yeah, definitely. So I have to say, I really love some of your ideas. I'm totally, I'll credit you, but totally stealing them. Borrowing them. Using them as an homage, whatever you want to say.
What a great contribution. Thank you so much. I want to get one more question in. I know we're a little bit over time, but Professor Sathi had a great question that I'd love to unmute her and let her contribute for just a few minutes before we can conclude. Professor Sathi, please go ahead.
Sure. The idea of a ghost student, makes me a little uncomfortable, only because it feels a bit dishonest with the students. And I was thinking about an alternatives to dealing with some of the issues that you mentioned, that you might use the ghost student for. For example, if we have undergraduate learning assistants in the classroom, might they be the people who could be contributing to channeling questions in a more productive way? But also, I found that even our answers can sometimes diffuse the question and show students how to model that kind of respectful engagement. So not necessarily needing to delete it, but just in our response, being able to do that. So do you have other ideas about if we didn't feel comfortable creating a student, in which we could mitigate some of the things you talked about?
No, absolutely. I mean, I knew that a large number of people would be uncomfortable with the feeling that there was some deception going on with the ghost student. And you're absolutely right. You can do that with a TA or even some student leaders. But so there are other ways of doing it. The timeliness is obviously facilitated by you being in control of the ghost student, because if it's something that you need to do quickly, then you often need to be in control of that. But yeah, no, I mean, I agree 100% that I feel it works well for me. I'm comfortable with it, but I can totally understand that other people would find that a little bit iffy.
Mm-hmm. Thank you.
Thank you. Well, great. Thank you, everyone, so much again for your participation and outstanding insights. This concludes our session for today. Thank you again, and have a lovely weekend.
Thank you, Caitlin.